The tranquil facade of British politics was abruptly shattered when an unexpected and highly classified police operation unfolded, centering on one of the most formidable and controversial figures of our time. For decades, she's been a lightning rod for fierce debate, an unyielding pillar of traditional values, and a voice that could effortlessly silence a chaotic parliamentary chamber. But recently, the discourse shifted from policy and polemics to something far more sinister. Authorities have confirmed the apprehension of a new individual connected to a deeply troubling and unexplained incident involving Ann Widdecombe. This development has sent ripples of shock through the establishment, not merely because of the gravity of the situation, but because of the complex web of adversaries she has cultivated over a lifetime spent firmly on the front lines of ideological warfare. To understand the weight of this moment, the shadows that converge around this suspect, and the sheer suspense of an investigation that has been kept strictly under wraps, we must dissect the three distinct pillars of her public life that inevitably turned her into a target for the extreme fringes of society. We begin with the first and most prominent layer of this multifaceted enigma, her legacy as an uncompromising architect of law, order, and traditional conservatism. During her zenith in the political arena, she was not merely a participant in the democratic process, she was a force of nature. She forged a reputation as a staunch defender of rigid disciplinary frameworks, often taking stances that placed her directly at odds with an increasingly progressive societal tide. Her approach to criminal justice and societal norms was unapologetically severe. She advocated for policies that many viewed as draconian, earning her a mixture of fierce loyalty from a specific demographic and intense, visceral animosity from those who felt marginalized by her rhetoric. When you position yourself as the ultimate arbiter of strict morality and unyielding law, you inevitably accumulate a shadowy roster of detractors. The psychology of public dissent dictates that while most will simply voice their opposition at the ballot box or through peaceful protest, a microscopic, dangerous fraction will internalize that anger, allowing it to fester into an obsession. The sudden appearance of a new suspect in this current inquiry forces us to look back at those years of political trench warfare. Was the seed of this recent, disturbing event planted decades ago in the heated debates of the House of Commons? The authorities are meticulously combing through her historical political battles, analyzing threats that were once dismissed as the standard background noise of public life. The suspense lies in the silence of the police. They have not disclosed the motive, but the sheer necessity of arresting a new individual suggests that the initial lines of inquiry were entirely insufficient, pointing instead toward a deeply rooted, perhaps historical, grievance. But the animosity directed toward her did not end when she stepped back from the front line of domestic parliamentary battles. This brings us to the second crucial element of this puzzle, her dramatic and highly polarizing pivot as a leading figure in the Brexit movement. The decision to leave the European Union was arguably the most divisive period in modern British history, tearing families and friendships apart, and fracturing the political landscape into deeply entrenched factions. When she stepped into the fray as a prominent voice for the Brexit Party, she transitioned from a retired politician to a revolutionary figurehead in the eyes of her supporters, and an absolute scourge in the eyes of her opponents. The rhetoric during this era was not just heated, it was toxic, explosive, and entirely uncharted territory for modern democratic discourse. By aligning herself so visibly with such a monumental geopolitical shift, she invited an entirely new wave of vitriol. This was no longer just about domestic policy, it was about the perceived betrayal or salvation of a nation. The intensity of the digital and real-world clashes during the Brexit referendum and its aftermath created a fertile breeding ground for extremism. Analyzing the timeline of the current investigation, one cannot help but wonder if the suspect currently in custody is a byproduct of this fractured national psyche. Did the fervent nationalism and equally fervent globalism of the Brexit era radicalize an individual to the point of taking unprecedented, shadowy action against one of the movement's most vocal cheerleaders? The police are notoriously tight-lipped, but behavioral profilers would argue that the transition from aggressive online trolling to a real-world, coordinated incident is a steep and dangerous escalation. The arrest of this new suspect implies a level of planning and obsession that transcends casual political disagreement, pointing the analytical lens directly toward the hyperpolarized environment she so heavily influenced. Yet to purely define her through the lens of hardline politics and Brexit would be a critical oversight, which leads us to the third, and perhaps most paradoxical layer of her public existence, her transformation into a bona fide media and cultural phenomenon. In an attempt to soften her image or perhaps simply to conquer a new domain, she stepped into the bewildering world of reality television, most notably the glittering, high-pressure environment of a primetime dance competition. This juxtaposition, the stern, uncompromising politician donning sequins and performing under the harsh glare of studio lights, created a cognitive dissonance that captivated the public. However, this foray into the entertainment industry carried its own unique dark undercurrents. The world of celebrity is a strange, intoxicating ecosystem, often characterized by a bizarre blend of intense adoration and deeply unsettling obsession. When a figure known for their icy exterior and strict boundaries suddenly allows the public a glimpse into their vulnerabilities on the dance floor, it disrupts the psychological barrier between the public figure and the spectator. For the vast majority, it was lighthearted entertainment, but for an individual harboring unhealthy fixations, this sudden accessibility could be misinterpreted as an invitation. The transition from the rigid structure of Westminster to the fluid, emotionally charged arena of reality TV fundamentally altered how the public consumed her image. It humanized her, and in doing so, it potentially made her accessible to a different caliber of adversary. The investigation into the recent incident must undoubtedly account for this phase of her life. Are the authorities dealing with a political operative harboring ideological resentment, or are they pursuing an obsessed individual from the surreal margins of celebrity culture? The introduction of a new suspect suggests the police are grappling with a profile that does not neatly fit into a single box, forcing them to cross-reference her political enemies with the often unpredictable nature of celebrity stalkers. The convergence of these three distinct worlds, the rigid traditionalist, the populist revolutionary, and the reluctant celebrity, creates a Venn diagram of potential threats that is as vast as it is deeply complex. The current police operation is not merely a standard procedural matter. It is a psychological excavation of a woman who has spent her life deliberately standing in the crossfire of public opinion. The fact that a new suspect has been taken into custody indicates that the initial narrative surrounding this shadowy event was fundamentally flawed. It suggests a labyrinthine investigation where the obvious leads were dead ends, and the truth remains buried under layers of misdirection and historical baggage. The authorities are navigating a minefield, acutely aware that the identity of this suspect and the underlying reasons for their actions could send shockwaves through an already fragile societal landscape. They are analyzing decades of parliamentary transcripts, thousands of hours of televised broadcasts, and an immeasurable volume of digital footprints to construct a profile of the individual who crossed the ultimate line. The suspense surrounding this case is amplified by the absolute vacuum of official information. In an era where every minor incident is instantly broadcast across the globe, the tight-lipped nature of this specific inquiry speaks volumes about its sensitivity. It hints at a scenario far more intricate than a random act of malice. It points toward a calculated, deliberate action by someone who understood her schedule, her routines, and the vulnerabilities that lie beneath her formidable public persona. When you analyze the trajectory of her life, you see a pattern of actively seeking out conflict, of thriving in the heat of ideological battle. But the rules of engagement change entirely when the battlefield shifts from the parliamentary floor to the privacy of one's own life. The authorities are acutely aware that they are not just investigating an isolated incident. They are attempting to untangle a web of consequences stemming from a lifetime of highly polarizing public service. As the new suspect undergoes intensive questioning behind closed doors, the public is left to piece together the fragments of this bewildering puzzle. The analytical mind cannot help but draw parallels between the intensity of the rhetoric she has espoused over the years and the extreme reactions it has invariably provoked. When a public figure builds a career on being unyielding, on refusing to compromise or soften their stance, they inevitably become a magnet for society's most extreme elements. The Brexit division widened the fault lines, the television appearances blurred the boundaries of privacy, and the decades of strict conservative rhetoric provided the initial spark. The question that hangs heavy in the air, the source of the current national unease, is which of these facets proved to be the catalyst for such a drastic escalation. The silent siege surrounding Ann Widdecombe is a stark, chilling reminder of the perilous nature of modern public life. It demonstrates that the echoes of political warfare do not simply fade away when the microphones are turned off. They can mutate, fester, and eventually manifest in the most unexpected and troubling of ways. The arrest of this new individual is not the conclusion of a mystery, but rather the unearthing of a much deeper, darker enigma. It forces society to confront the uncomfortable reality that the line between fervent political opposition and dangerous obsession is perilously thin. As the investigation delves deeper into the psyche of the suspect and the complex history of their target, one thing remains terrifyingly clear. The full truth of this shadowy incident is still hidden, locked away in the secretive files of an ongoing investigation, waiting to reveal a connection that nobody saw coming. The silence from the authorities is deafening, and in that silence, the suspense continues to build, leaving us to wonder what dark secrets will finally be brought into the light when the doors of the courtroom eventually open.